Hello there and welcome to the Star Wars Showcase YouTube channel. I've got a new tutorial up here today on how to make some more Kitbash Imperial Remnant Stormtroopers, actually doing a little of boil and pop part swapping between different action figures to really build out those squads. So let's take a look. So as we take a look at some of our completed troopers here, I'll provide a couple of basic definitions just to kind of set the scene. The first being a term known as kit bashing, the idea where we take parts from different action figures, we combine them all together and make something new and unique out of those formerly disparate parts. We are also today going to be employing a technique known as boil and pop, where we take an action figure, we submerge it in hot water, which softens up the plastic and allows us to remove the limbs without causing any damage to the figure itself. By then applying that to the parts that we've removed, we can reattach those figures as part of the kit bash process that we just discussed. As one final piece of scene setting, the projects that we're attempting today are inspired by this concept art from The Mandalorian, where you can see our Remnant Stormtroopers have, mismatched armor and different weapons that aren't necessarily regulation use. And so by taking all of these different parts and pieces from different figures, we can kind of get this cool, almost non-cohesive look for some of our troops. And as a final call out, our accessories today have been sourced from Thanatos Unlimited on Etsy. They have a fantastic selection of 3D printed Star Wars parts and pieces, and I highly recommend checking them out. Okay, introductions and background aside, let's get into what we need to complete this project. So we're starting off with just a basic Black Series Stormtrooper body, and for the purposes of modeling, we'll be using a Black Series Greef Karga as well. I selected this because he has some nice kind of normal civilian-esque clothes on, but these figures can also be sourced pretty cheaply. You'll notice I also have a pair of needle nose pliers, as well as a glass of warm water that's been heated up in the microwave for about 15 to 20 seconds. So what we're going to do first is take our Greef Karga, or our just kind of source material figure, and we're going to dunk that in that hot water to let things soak for about 30 seconds or so. And what this is going to do is soften up the plastic pieces so that we're able to remove those limbs and attach them to our troopers. So after about half a minute has passed, we can pull Greef out of that warm bath, and you'll notice, pop, the head comes right off as it has been soaking in that hot water. Now, as we remove the arms and the legs here, one thing you're going to notice is I am just straight yanking these arms right out of their socket. And you will notice that there is a butterfly joint. There's that other piece on top of the arm there where you can see the little break there. And I'm not interested in preserving the butterfly joint on this figure, as I'm more interested in the arm itself. But as we work with our Stormtrooper and any other figures where you want to plug an arm back in, you'll want to be careful and preserve that butterfly joint. So we'll walk over that process a little bit later in the video here. But for getting our donation arms, you'll notice I was able to just pop those right out of the socket. After following those steps, I put Greef back in for an additional bath, gave things about another 30 seconds as I'm looking to essentially split the figure in half. So with a little bit of a pull, you'll notice here I have split the upper chest from the lower legs. In the case of this particular project, I don't really have any more need for that upper torso, but as you're doing this with other parts and projects, it gives you kind of a library of different pieces to use. Speaking of that library, you're able to easily remove this holster, which is a nice little accessory if you want to add that to maybe another bounty hunter character in the future. And with that, we're going to pop the bottom legs in there for another hot water dunk. So after waiting a little while longer, we can remove that, and the trick here is really using your thumb as a bit of a fulcrum when attempting to pull these legs out there. If you kind of squeeze it underneath with that warm kind of moldable plastic that we've just created, you can pop those legs right out of the joint there. So you'll just need to repeat this. Take things nice and slow. If you slip up or if you're going too fast, you can certainly, pop a fingernail up a little bit. So be sure to take this nice and easy. And if you're having difficulty, if it's not coming out, just put that part and piece back in that hot water to soak a little bit more. So once we have all of our Greef Karga pieces all separated out, we're then going to put our Stormtrooper into dunk to do a little bit of part exchanging. Alright, after we've repeated the same process for our Stormtrooper, and you may need to reheat your water here from time to time, we're going to again try to wedge our thumb right in there and just pop that joint right out there using both the heat as well as the leverage pressure of our thumb there. And while that joint is still a little bit warm, we can actually take the previously removed limb, and if those ball joint sizes fit up correctly, which your mileage is going to vary depending on the figures that you're using, you'll be able to pop that old leg into the new joint there and create what is essentially a new kit-bashed figure there, and still have all of the same articulation, the ability to move that leg and rotate it without any issue. Now, the figures I used for this project, it's your Grief Karga as well as the Client. The limbs from both of those figures are interchangeable with our Black Series Stormtrooper here. But again, you're going to do a little bit of confirmation or perhaps take a leap of faith when it comes to the exchanging of those different arms and those legs. Alright, so with our parts warming up again, we're going to take the Grief Karga arm that we're going to add, and we're working to remove that butterfly joint that we tore out of place previously, as we are going to socket this into the Imperial Stormtroopers butterfly joint there. So you can see I'm working with that softer plastic to try to remove this. It does take a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, so again, be careful. I made, I think, 5 or 6 of these guys, and by the very end, my thumbs were really sore from working through all these different parts and pieces like that. So make sure you've got plenty of heat applied and that you're not damaging yourself or the figure that we're trying to work with here. So now we're going to demonstrate what I had previously discussed, is preserving the butterfly joint of our trooper. And you'll notice I'm slipping my thumb in front of the butterfly joint and using my other hand to pull on the arm outwards. The idea being that we're not pulling the butterfly joint out, just the socketed arm. So that leaves that in place. It's going to maintain our articulation, and then we can plug in the Grief Karga arm and still kind of maintain that full shoulder rotation. So again, you're going to want to take this process nice and slow with plenty of that applied hot water heat here. And if we do this right and preserve the butterfly joint, we're able to take that limb, if those sizes match again, mileage may vary, and plug that right into the trooper's arm so that our sizes are able to match right up, and boom, we've got a figure who has articulation, but now this kind of hodgepodge mismatch sort of look to it. So always remember, when we're using newer figures and applying this boil and pop technique, who've got that butterfly joint in there, you want to get one of your thumbs to brace against the butterfly joint so we're not pulling that out, and then the other pulling that arm out so that we're able to plug in another piece without damaging the shoulder structure of the figure. And if we do that right, we are then left with a great base template to build out some Remnant troopers here. So by applying a bunch of different weathering and kind of dirty grunge, as well as some extra accessories, we can build out a whole Remnant squad. Okay, so now for the fun part, let's give a play-by-play on some of the different troops I was able to put together by following these steps. So first we've got sort of a Remnant gunslinger here. And you'll notice the blaster that was sourced from Anthanatos Unlimited, I believe is like a Clone Wars kind of pirate blaster. I've also used a piece of elastic to give him a kind of shoulder armor piece over that new arm. I believe that comes from the Black Series Zero figure. I've also done a little bit of custom paint work on one of his other shoulders there to kind of give him that shore trooper coloring, as well as kind of with that red bicep armor as well. And then putting a whole bunch of different wash coats as well as some dry weathering with a Tamiya weathering kit over that to create this kind of almost pirate looking trooper here. So I'm hoping as we kind of model some more of these that this gives you some ideas for different parts or perhaps gives you a little bit of inspiration for other ways or parts and pieces you'd want to try out. So next up we've got a Remnant Scout here. I've given him some gray coloring on his kind of jaw portion of his helmet, as well as a pauldron from our Black Series Rocket Trooper and an arm from the Client. I really love the idea of the Stormtroopers who have, you know, like a human hand that's visible. I think it adds kind of some color uniqueness there. And you'll notice here across his chest, I've also given him, using a piece of elastic, as well as some 3D printed pouches, sort of a bandolier here. But the kind of piece de resistance for this figure, of course, I think is going to be his blaster. I've given him the CR2 from the new Star Wars Battlefront 2, one of my favorites when playing as the assault class. But I've also added some additional kind of dry brush weathering on this, again, trying to really contribute to and make this kind of dirty, desperate trooper. Up next, we have our Remnant Heavy Gunner, and this guy is using a heavy blaster from Anthanatos. This one is a lot of fun to paint up. I think it has a lot of personality coming from the original trilogy. I've also given him this kind of harness set of pouches, so it looks like he's carrying, some explosives or a bunch of supplies or ammunition or something. I also really like the leg that I was able to source here from the client. Just that plain brown coloring I think looks really good alongside another Greef Karga arm there. So I think this guy is a lot of fun, kind of builds it out as kind of a menacing force in the background of a scene. And I think with these guys, you can attach, all kinds of gear, maybe a backpack or more shoulder armor there to kind of contribute to more of that heavy look. All right, up next we have our Remnant Engineer, and I think this might be my favorite of all of the troopers I put together here. You'll notice the backpack has been borrowed from a Bodhi Rook. We're using that same kind of shoulder armor technique we described earlier for our gunslinger. I used a 3D printed kind of extra clone trooper accessory to give him that armor or that extra ammunition slot on his leg there. And then he's got some extra headphones from a Valaverse figure and some more custom paintwork for that kind of bicep here. And I love the idea of adding in a couple of unhelmeted troopers to really show, it's desperate, we don't have all the equipment we need, and we're just kind of making do with all that we have available. And that, along with the heavy scoped pistol here, I think makes this my favorite of the group. However, perhaps coming at a close second is our Remnant Defender here. And this guy I put together using a shield from the Gaming Greats Riot Scout Trooper that was on sale at GameStop a while back. Added a bunch of extra weathering and kind of dirt effects to that, and gave him a 3D printed Briar pistol. I'm not actually sure if that's a Briar pistol or just something that looks very similar, but I like the idea of him being able to hold that right over the top of the shield, like he's going to be bum rushing and firing at the same time. He's also got that pauldron, as well as, of course, a bunch of different weathering, and the other leg from the client. So I think that all together really just makes this kind of great mismatched kind of rush defender, door breacher sort of figure. And last but not least, we have our Remnant Officer. So again, going with that unmasked look here for this guy. Borrowed from the client, since we already used his legs, I took the Camtono that he comes from, maybe seeming like it's some kind of valuable intel or some kind of package that's being protected. He also has that bandolier with some elastic, some custom paintwork on the armor. This beret comes from a G.I. Joe figure, but I think my favorite piece, of course, is going to be this shotgun accessory. Any old school Star Wars Legacy fans might recognize this as the Rock Chop Special that Cade Skywalker carries, but I think this looks great as kind of a mercenary or just kind of like an underworld sort of weapon. And so having this, something that can be wielded with two hands or just fired with one, I think really adds to, again, this very desperate look for these guys. So I am a big fan of the officer, who I think really looks well if you've got any extra heads lying around for that unhelmeted look, as he's kind of like, just grunt old sort of like sergeant who's in charge of things. So that is the Remnant squad that I've put together here. As you see different clearance sales for different action figures like Greef Karga or the Client, you can pick those guys up super cheap, and when they contribute, the arms and the legs to different figures or projects like this, you see that you can pretty affordably put together some pretty fun squads like this. So as a call out, if you are interested in any of these projects here or any of the projects that I put together, they are available for sale on my eBay page. So there's a link down in the description below. For any orders that come in, I also throw in some extra goodies, some different trading cards and things like that. So please check that out if you are interested in supporting this channel. But thank you so much for watching through here. If you guys have any questions about any of the techniques used here, or have any suggestions for, different parts or pieces or different figures that can contribute limbs, let me know down in the comments below. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to check out some of the other content up on the channel. We've got plenty of other action figure tutorials, as well as reviews for new and unaltered Black Series figures, so make sure to check those out.